Okay, welcome everybody. It says we've got 4 people in here, but um, with us is Amita Kuttner. She just told me how to pronounce that. You could say it, or sorry, they. I'm new to these pronouns. Apologies for that. I might make that slip a couple times, so just apologies in advance for that. But Amita is running for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, and I will just let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, well, I'll just give a quick background so we have the most time for questions as possible. But yes, my name is Amita Kuttner. I do in fact go by they, them pronouns. It's hard for me too, so all forgiveness around. We're all making a good effort there. I am speaking with everybody tonight from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, which is also known as Vancouver. But I actually live on Lesquity Island, which is unceded Tla'amin territory, and in the adjacent riding to you all in Courtenay, Alberni. And it's a lovely place, and I wish I was always there in the trees. So a bit about my background: I am an astrophysicist. I was a candidate last election in Burnaby North Seymour, as well as the critic for science and innovation for the party for about a year and a half between 2018 and 2020. What I'm bringing forward in the leadership, which I am very honored to be presenting, is a collective vision for what we can be as a party and the future of our country as well. And it's founded around 3 core concepts of justice, science, and resilience. And the first one, justice, is about equity and decolonization and making sure that every single person has equal and positive access to life so we can actually flourish here on this planet. The second one, of science, is so that we have credibility on the national stage, and Canada as well, hopefully having credibility internationally. And this comes with evidence-based policy, but it's also the perspective that I bring with a scientific background and being an astrophysicist in wanting to have that perspective from beyond the atmosphere, looking back at our collective home and wanting us to have what we can have here, which is so much more. And making sure that our policy really is as robust and evidence-based as possible, which is not the most common thing in the political world. And the third thing we're discussing is resilience or preparedness, the idea that we need to be as a party ready for elections and the stuff that's thrown our way, but also as communities, as people, as a country, ready for the climate emergency and all the other crises that we're currently facing. And this is really personal to me because of what happened to my family in 2005. My home in North Vancouver was destroyed by a mudslide, which also killed my mother and left my father with permanent brain damage and physical damage as well. And what that has taught me is that, well, other than I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through, it taught me a lot about trauma, but also about the real on the ground effects that we need to be prepared for. So that's kind of the overall discussion. We're talking about policy, but of course it's up to the membership, and we're hoping to really grow this movement into something that can unite the country and can be focused on well-being and everything that we can be.
Thanks. That's there's a lot there. You really yeah. Sorry for your loss, by the way. I don't know. I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times, and I'm sure it was a while ago, but I know what it's like to lose somebody. So I could see how that motivates you in a really big way to tackle, and also as a scientist to tackle the issues that we're facing here. So I just wanted to say before I get into the questions here. So you're actually from Lesquity, and you live in the riding that Sean Wood was running in. Did you happen to meet him?
Yes, I did meet him at an election preparedness event down on the South Island. But
cool.
Yeah, I was of course living in Burnaby North Seymour most of the time when I was running there.
Yeah. Well, I lived in Vancouver. I could see how you'd prefer to be over amongst the trees instead of the concrete ones.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the first question so we've got a series of 6 questions here that we sort of prepared as an EDA and voted on. And then once we get that, we're going to open up to the questions to the audience. So we'll just get through those first. So the first question is that the CERB, what that stands for, Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit. That's
Response benefit, yeah.
Response benefit, that's right. The CERB has been a critical emergency measure to help Canadians weather the COVID-19 pandemic. But some people say it has become a disincentive to low-income Canadians going back to work. How do you see a guaranteed livable income being different? How would you implement a GLI in order to in order to ensure that it's not a disincentive to work? And what do you see as the main sort of benefits as GLI? I know that's 3 questions there, but they're all sort of related.
Yes, I'll get to every piece of it. So
Okay.
first of all, I think it's overwhelmingly depressing that $2,000 is enough incentive to stay home. So if people are saying, well, that's actually more than I'm going to get working, we have a serious problem of not being able to pay workers. And this shouldn't be falling on businesses either. If businesses can't afford to pay workers that much a month, they have a serious problem and need a lot more support. So I'm just going to switch that up and say that fundamentally there's a problem with our system if that's the case. So what I see in the guaranteed livable income is beyond just a basic amount, but the concept that everybody needs to have enough to live on, a livable wage, a livable income. And right now we have a massive problem of inequality, of inequity, and we have to solve it quickly. And a lot of the policy work that I've done has actually been around artificial intelligence and automation and the coming changes to our workforce and industries because of that. So there is a great need, other than just the pandemic and the climate crisis, but the automation crisis also, that we have something to tie people over. I think it's always an interesting concept that is brought up in these conversations about disincentivizing work, because it's my own privilege, but I've never felt that way. I've had the choice to do whatever I want with my life, and it's been a gift. And I think the concept that we always, as humans, need to be tied to work rather than finding something meaningful to do that contributes to society, that then is found valuable, therefore we are provided for as people, and that our worth doesn't come from our productivity, but rather we are valid and worthy for existing at all. So there is, I think, a cultural component that needs to be changed there. But at the same time, on the other side, people may need a break and not want to work a huge amount. Maybe we should all be working less. But I think the incentive to be put there is, rather than making it necessary that everybody tie work and labor to survival, we provide the options for things that people want to do. And so we look at where economies can grow, what industries can be supported in the future that are not going to be really destructive to our environment and our ecosystems, and that will actually be benefiting the way of life that we would like to have. And so in that transition of both the climate emergency and automation, we want to make sure that people have training programs, and we're tracking the industries and supporting the ones that are going to be positive. And the question then comes down to sometimes, well, what are we going to do for work? And my answer is always, well, look outside. Are you happy? Is this good? Is this not dystopian to you? You're fine with everything here. Then nobody has to do anything, right? We're just good. We can just
solved. What do we need it all for?
We can eat the food, but to me, there's so much beautiful possibility in what people can be doing. And so a guaranteed livable income needs to be a foundational piece of all these transitions, so that people have the freedom to find a life that has meaning. And I don't think it's the ultimate answer. We need to work on democratizing both work and economy, but it really is a good stopgap.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I really like that answer. That's kind of how I feel, almost word for word on the subject. It's interesting, the idea of planned obsolescence and how we had this massive production amount that was happening, and then they started realizing, well, people don't need to work as much, so let's just make things break. Interesting. Great. I did have a thought about that, a question I wanted to ask, not on this thing. I realize that this might be out of order here, but people, so this idea of disincentivization to work, what do you think about have you read anything about the psychology, about the fact that people want to work and want to be productive at things? You know, and it's just that we work in sort of jobs right now that don't actually give us any sense of productivity.
Yeah. And I think that there is a beauty in that. And also in these conversations, there can be a judgment about what people want to do. And I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
There are many things that we can find joy in and enjoy doing, and no one else should be judging what that is. And the opportunity to find that. And I do think fundamentally, when we're not exhausted and hate our work, we will find things to do.
Yes.
And to have that societal structure that values the contribution of the person rather than the rote productivity or whatever.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Okay, cool. So we'll do the next question here. It's what is your stance on drug prohibition? So it's another one of these 3-piece questions. Do you support decriminalization or legalization of drugs in Canada? And what approach would you support and why?
So generally, I am a full supporter of decriminalization. There are probably a couple things that I would consider legalizing, especially naturally occurring drugs that have especially therapeutic uses. There's probably a good reason to have those be provided and regulated in other ways. But I think it's very much necessary that we decriminalize, and it's part of a much larger picture of justice reform, and also talking about what in our society we currently have structured to do what. And the fact that we have prohibition at the moment of so much, I think, is a large driver of the health crisis that is the opioid epidemic and meth crisis in other places as well. And overwhelmingly looking at the evidence on that in other countries, especially looking at the Portugal model, decriminalization and treating it just like a something that happens and to people, and also the really being there for the individuals and the health side of it rather than blame is a really important part. And on the BC Town Hall, I mentioned this, but because of my own experience of trauma, I fully see that, because I've watched my own tendency to wish to escape in the worst experiences of PTSD. So therefore, I look at all these crises and drug use as a societal factor and the result of trauma. And so we have crises here for sure. And we need to address that with compassion for every individual and also the people who are dealing with it in their communities. And I think that the surest way to do that well is to be able to decriminalize and work on everything as a health crisis with safe supply and programs for people.
Totally. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Kind of seems like treating it as a crime issue is like kicking people when they're down almost sometimes, hey?
And it's just a self-perpetuating system. So, there's not real harm being done to people other than the people who are themselves in it, right?
Yeah, victimless crime, I suppose,
Yes.
is what they call it. Yeah. Okay. So the next question we got is, due to the pandemic, Canada's deficit has been growing. Is this a big problem in your view? Some people think that Canada will have no choice but to bring in austerity measures. Do you think Canada can come out of the pandemic without needing to bring in cuts to programs?
I don't think it's a huge problem. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And one of them is that everybody around the whole world is doing it at the same time. And we are linked to a global economy. We're all going through it at the same time. And I think that we will have to worry about the possibility of austerity measures. I don't think that they're going to be necessary. I think there are many, many ways to get out of it and get out of our current place and economic downturns, whatever that means. I think we're going to get to a little more economic discussion in a bit, and I can address some of the other stuff there. But austerity generally isn't actually the best way even to get out of that, because economies run by all the people participating in them. And therefore, the best way to actually have a strong economy, even under current terms, is to make sure everybody has the ability to get back up. And giving money or supports to those who are struggling or who have to spend the money every day goes a lot further to actually restart an economy than taking it away. And perhaps supporting businesses from the top doesn't quite work as well. But we will have to fight against austerity measures because it's often suggested. But I think that we will absolutely get through this, and we don't have to worry about a deficit as much as we might usually be concerned because of how it's going globally. There are also questions about how much a deficit matters depending on your general placement in geopolitical space. And I usually want to say heading towards economic self-sufficiency is the best idea, and that we should be careful when making wild economic choices.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. The idea that I think it was Douglas Rushkoff who I heard this idea from first, where it's the speed of money is what determines the health of an economy. It's not the amount that you got sitting sloshing around in a bank account. It's whether that's going and changing hands kind of thing. So they ain't got money to spend.
As much as I don't really think the GDP is a good marker, it really is true that the movement, to some extent, which happens when people need to spend it to survive and on all their necessities. And when you take that away, oh, whoops, even on things that you get right beyond that, the things that we like to do, like going out to eat or enjoying the arts, for instance, which should be a much bigger part of our society and what we value. But, the way that is kind of structured to So we think about it backwards, but trickle down doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody will get to this asking questions about this, but we don't actually have one prepared. But I agree with you. The idea of GDP being a bad marker of the health of a country. Gross domestic happiness, I think, was Bhutan. But so we'll move on to the next question here. There has been a critique that many in the renewable energy crowd want to continue the perpetual growth model, just change it to green growth. Do you think we should have economic growth as our main goal for our economy? Or should we be looking at a steady state economy, or even at planned degrowth, which I guess is a perfect segue from what we were just talking about.
And there's the GDP piece in there.
Oh, yes, so it is. Look at that.
Technically, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that just back to what we were just talking about, economic growth is a confusing concept in the first place, because right now it's linked to GDP and it does not at all measure well-being. So what the economy actually does and how we actually measure that needs to be separated, I think, from other pieces. Growth and economic growth as it stands, even if it were to be green, is still going to send us beyond our consumption limits in terms of our planetary boundaries. So we can't. Our survival depends on it. And you can also tend down roads where, sure, in our prosperity here, we'll replace everything, but we are at the same time condemning people to suffer across the planet in places that can't prepare, and where we are taking the resources and continuing to colonize there as well as home in a way that is extractive in order to cause that growth. So I think it's dangerous because under that concept of economic growth, you need to continue consumption. So therefore, along the way, I think we need to head to having a steady state circular economy that focuses on well-being and is localized and also just, so we're not increasing inequality. But on the way there, I think we will have to look at degrowth. And so we don't have to throw out GDP altogether, but we should be expecting it to go down perhaps, and instead replace it with markers that grow the things that we like, which are well-being and health. And there's a couple different ones. And then in a circular economy, looking at things, some of the things that GDP might be trying to pay attention to, but without some of the ridiculous pieces, to see the flow of say capital, if we're keeping it that way for a bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it seems like you sort of just described donut economics. Are you familiar with? Yeah.
Yes. And there are, amazingly, or maybe not amazingly, a huge number of circular economic models. And this is what we found when we were writing up our preliminary platform document, just to kind of go over some of the thoughts we have to bring up discussion in the party of where we could go. And I was at COP25 in Madrid in December. And there, in Europe especially, the concept of a circular economy is completely normalized. We're talking about how to get industries to zero waste. It's like, okay, so there's probably still issues with this. And when we were doing the research, we found many, many, many different models of circular economies, and donut model is one.
Wow, very cool. Cool. That sounds like a really good conference to have gone to. So I would have enjoyed it, I think.
It was a bit scary. I learned things about carbon markets I wish I didn't know. Well,
oh, really?
Good to know the truth, but yeah.
Yeah. It seems like every time you find out a new fact about the climate or how we're dealing with it, it's I wish I hadn't learned that.
Pretty much.
Okay, well, let's get away from that scary topic. Next question is, so some Indigenous groups in Canada have been on the front lines of resisting fossil fuel development. I'm sure you're familiar with Wet'suwet'en. That was a really big thing we had in our province here. Oh yeah, you are from this province. Sorry.
I am your neighbor.
Yes, absolutely. We went over that. So there's been a lot of Indigenous groups on the front lines of resisting fossil fuel development, while some others have embraced it and have even partnered with fossil fuel corporations or want to buy into big projects. So what do you think the Green Party of Canada's approach should be in regards to respecting Indigenous sovereignty when some nations and groups decide to invest in LNG, oil sands development, or pipelines and the like? How do we handle that?
Well, I think it's the question we came up with. So I think it's the most important question. We put decolonization at the center of our platform because we think it's foundational and should be the beginning of all the conversations that we have. And our land acknowledgements are important because they center on host nations, but we kind of need to go a lot more beyond that and actually talk about all the work that needs to be done, and especially for those of us who are settlers, take responsibility to do some work. So a couple different pieces. I'll try to address it all. I think that the work on all of these issues when it comes to Indigenous rights and sovereignty starts with personal and institutional work to decolonize, to admit that our party and our government are colonial in nature, and that we need to actually look at our systems of governance and society that are just enforcing colonialism, and in a way that harms us as well. It's not a positive thing overall. We are oppressed by our own systems for sure. And that work is a personal one in the sense that we should look at our lives and what we have from the systems around us and what they actually do, and also in the way that government works. And all the assumptions that we make that are perpetuated are very colonial. So we need to work on backtracking that. And there are obviously immediate things that need to be done, like mental health care and drinking water, for instance, are kind of the things that it would be absurd if we would continue not doing that. But where we should be heading is a true nation-to-nation relationship. And I think that this is what that reference is. And a true understanding of what sovereignty is, and the idea that title was never given up. And under international law, these are sovereign nations. And Canada shouldn't exist here the way it is. And yet a lot of the frameworks that are provided for understanding this, or even nationhood at the moment in a way that we're trying to provide sovereignty, are colonial because they're under BC or they're under Canada. And even places that have treaties, they're not treaties to give up land, but an agreement for settlers to exist there and have mutual responsibility. So what happens in these conversations about resource projects is you have disagreement, but of course there's disagreement. And what often happens is there's consultation, and that doesn't really mean anything. And also this idea that if you have 50% of the nations agreeing or disagreeing, then that's what you go with. And that makes no sense when you're talking about sovereign nations, because you think about other groups of countries, for instance, like in Europe, you don't put a pipeline through Belgium if all the other EU nations want it. They still have statehood.
No, pass it on through Belgium. They won't mind.
They won't mind, right? So, but say you had 50% of EU states, 50 plus one, agreeing to something, and it went through everybody. Like, no, you don't get to do that. And that's the thing. You dealing with true sovereignty. There is a concept of nationhood that we are fundamentally not respecting, no matter how much people say nation to nation at any given point. And on the flip side, the only option that has been given for economic development after ripping away a way of life and inflicting trauma and genocide and ongoing trauma and genocide is fossil fuel expansion. And then also, government ways of governance, basically, or like colonial ways of governance being imposed. So all of that is wrong. And we need to be talking about sovereignty, basic rights, and agency, so that everybody has the right to self-determination, but also the right to what they have as economic choices, and also choices in the way of life.
Very good answer. Very concise. I would not have given an answer that was that concise and comprehensive. I had to remember, I forgot, speaking of settler responsibilities, I forgot to give a land acknowledgement. So I'm hosting, I suppose, even though this is happening on the internet, I'm physically standing in the unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Nice bunch of people live just over there, really close to me, actually. So sorry about that, everybody.
Sorry, I actually just wanted to add one more thing to that. Is that I'm personally working on also decolonizing my language. And sometimes it's not always right. And we talk about giving people opportunities and projects. And I think that in itself is kind of a colonial concept, but also a place that we've stuck ourselves in. So a lot of the work is partnership, and going to a place of, even the conversations where you say, I'm going to empower somebody. The truth is they've been disempowered. So it is not the giving of power. It is more like allowing people to take back the power that they should have always had.
Yeah. Provide them with some freedom to act as they were.
Get out of the way. Undo the things that we did wrong.
We'll step away.
And also take responsibility for the stuff we messed up that we should in fact take responsibility for.
Yeah. Change the systems and all of that. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Okay. So last question we've got from our EDA, and then we'll open it up to the chat on YouTube there. So in the wake of the death of George Floyd, international protests have called for defunding of the police to address systemic racism and police brutality in general. However, the term defunding the police means something different to a lot of different people. So do you support the idea of defunding the police in some capacity? And if so, what would, oh, we've changed the way this word, sorry. If so, what would you be calling for as a leader of the Green Party of Canada? So what does it mean to you, and how would you, do you agree with it?
Yes. So I do think we need to defund the police, and I would be supporting it. And I think that defunding is a gradual process. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. But also we need to go to the point of full abolition, because otherwise we do not remove the problems of systemic racism. So the first steps are especially going for police programs and also the RCMP, which of course is a colonial force by nature, having been created to invade and colonize these lands. So definite issues of systemic racism there. Yeah. And I think we also do need to avoid villainizing individuals, because it is not about them. And having known people that have worked on police reform really hard, and also with people within the system who've really wanted to change it, they get a little ways and they do a lot of work, but in the end you come up against systemic difficulties that you can't get past. And those are the things that we really need to get to. So in places of overfunding and also kind of starting, you take some of the funding that's going to police forces and you put it towards other things. We obviously need to pretty immediately have not police responding to mental health calls.
Yeah,
but also looking at, the other systems. So the funding should go to social systems, health, especially mental health, education, housing, many things. And then after that, of course, right now we have to have different systems of enforcement, I guess, because of the way society is currently structured. So we need to be looking at community safety programs, and also, yeah, we live in a much wider world. There's going to be issues of foreign people, but also, weapons trafficking, that you're going to have to have a particular group to respond to. And there's detective work and all these things, but they don't have to particularly be under a police force, and nor do they have to be under one that is systemically racist and oppressive and marginalizes more than just racialized people as well. But I think there is a larger piece that needs to be done at the same time. And that's stuff like decriminalizing victimless crimes. And that's working also towards prison abolition, so that we, I hope, are not looking at incarceration as punishment, but actually talking about recovery and helping, and always being survivor-centered and making sure they have support as well, but helping people not recommit crimes, because the current system causes people to recommit rather than supporting them out of it. And then, yes, there will be a subset that probably shouldn't be around others, and they can be somewhere else. But that's not the same thing as punishing them for whatever it is that they are or experience. So that's a piece. And then generally also addressing the systemic and societal determinants or causes of crime. Because right now poverty is a big one, but there's a lot of other pieces as well. So providing mental health supports and making sure that everybody actually has all their basic needs met and their rights met will go a long way. So there's there's a vision down the road of a society that just doesn't need policing the way we have it. And it's a relatively new concept, and it's a pretty oppressive one. But in the, it's not something you do just immediately. You work towards.
Yeah. It's not a light switch, it's a dimmer. That's how my friend describes it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So in summary, then the idea is taking immediate steps to start to defund, change the responsibilities of the police, with the eventual goal of completely dismantling it and installing in its place a variety of systems, one of which will have the job of keeping us safe from things that are very obviously violent issues like gun trafficking and stuff like that. Yep. Does that sum it up pretty well?
Yep. And also working at the same time to make sure that we lessen those pieces as much as we can.
Yeah. Changing society, making sure that it's a little less crime here. Let me just see if I have gotten any questions. Okay, we haven't got any questions just here at the moment. There's something that you said there that I had a little thought about. I'm sure it'll come to me about victimless crimes. These are really long topics,
They are, yes.
Yeah.
I gave shorter answers. I always could talk longer, but there you go.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on with it. Oh yeah, I wanted to say, in Norway, I'm sure you haven't gone over to COP25, but I'm sure you are a little familiar with the prison system they have there, and it's like, I mean, it's completely focused on rehabilitation. You can see how much less reoffense there is from that kind of a system than one that sort of fetishizes revenge. You know, it's
Yes,
it's a
which
pretty
is
North
not
American thing,
which is
it
not
seems.
justice.
Yeah, it's not, and it doesn't really fix the problem in any sort of way,
It
and
doesn't.
maybe it makes some people feel a little bit better, but yeah.
And some of the restorative programs that we've had and we kind of talked about as a country and said we were moving towards haven't really materialized, and they haven't been as restorative as what's going on in Norway, especially. So I think that's why we've also headed towards talking about recovery justice rather than restoration always, because now there's kind of multiple meanings to it. Yeah, I don't know. It's all very complex.
So what's the difference between recovery and restoration here? What can you break that down a little for me?
Yeah. So in recovery, I think it is looking at basically what Norway is doing, and the idea that people are in a place that they need help if there's anything that's going on. Restorative justice does mean that to some people, for sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt. But also to others, it means, just a different sort of way of treating people in prisons, but
Right.
not actually addressing anything fundamentally or giving certain people different options instead of prison time,
Okay.
which probably doesn't always address the underlying problems either. So it's still
Right.
kind of deterrent and threat and punishment based concept, even if
Right.
the
Right.
punishment itself. And I think it can also be very, at least my feeling of it from some of the things, again, like half the people it means perfectly lovely thing, and for
Yeah.
others it doesn't, but it can be very, very condescending still, because there's a lot of blame and lack of taking responsibility on behalf of society for the problems that exist.
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah.
that's a necessary component, I think. And two, actually just looking at the judicial system itself and the bias therein, and there's a lot of things to work
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. A lot of bias in there. I was how do you think about the idea? This isn't one of the questions, but what do you think about the idea of like AI judges? Just because you're very you're getting a PhD, so I figure close to some of those concepts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, my PhD's in physics, but
Yeah.
yes, and I had worked with my advisor on AI policy related things for a while.
Mm.
Don't have too much faith right now, and that's because of training data. So right
Oh yeah.
now, the only way that AIs learn are based on what's fed to them, and
Hmm.
what's fed to them in terms of especially sentencing information is incredibly biased.
Hmm.
So now places that are using this are starting to see that it's all reproduced. That doesn't mean that it can't be figured out,
Right.
but we have yet to figure out how to properly program an artificially intelligent being without training
Bring
data.
our biases into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and our training data is all problematic, because I mean,
Yeah.
look at us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right now we're just passing on the same problems, and there's the conversation. Okay, so, and I think it actually has slowed down AI development a bit too, because
Yeah.
we do care to some extent, but you can
Yeah.
try to fish through your training data and say, well, this is wrong, but then what moralistic and ethical code are you using,
Yeah.
and how are you always careful about this, because AIs don't stay the same forever, they learn. So
Yeah. Yeah. Who thought a
yep.
robot could be racist? Oh, if we have a question here. Okay. Oh, sorry, this is small text. Let me get. Okay, so from Jim. Sorry, I hope I'm not getting away from the microphone here. So from Jim, the evidence is now clear. At least 50% of life on the planet has been lost. Our consumption of the planet is growing at an exponential rate that doubles every 30 years. It is an unavoidable mathematical reality that something being consumed at exponential rate goes from 50% to zero in one exponential doubling. It's that old French school child thing. We have less than 30 years before life is obliterated. Are you willing to deal with that reality? That's the whole question.
That's exactly why I'm here.
Yeah, I guess that's
I so I don't always like talking about myself, and I do tell my story of what I've been through.
Yeah.
But I watched my own life be completely destroyed. And
Yeah.
so what I think we need actually right now are leaders that are prepared for that reality and can help guide everyone else through what's coming. And I hope that we don't stay on that trajectory and that we work hard and communicate well and rebuild our systems and our society so we don't do that. But even if we don't go to complete destruction, which I have enough hope and faith that we won't, we are going to have to suffer a lot of chaos. And I think at this point, that's actually what this leadership race is about. Sure, it's the person who's leading the Green Party, but we have the opportunity to have somebody on the national stage to be there when the country goes through this.
Yeah, it's a tough subject. I know, Jim. And I guess I just want to put a bit of a finer point on this because I think I understand exactly where he's coming from. Is it's a bit more pointed at biodiversity because there's a lot of talk about climate change, and obviously it's an all-encompassing amplifier of all the issues that we've got, right? And it's also its own problem in and of itself. But specifically with biodiversity, that's not all of that's caused by climate change. So I guess he's probably concerned about that as well.
Yes, I am too. So actually, the answer is the same.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I guess that's fair.
And I think that, but it's not obvious, and that's because for me, I don't consider myself separate from the ecosystem around me. I feel like I'm intertwined with the survival of the planet, and whether that's an astrophysical concept or a very human one, I'm not sure. But I do not, well, other than the very scientific risk of biodiversity loss being immediately dangerous to us, it's also just something I feel and I weather, but it's just as serious to me.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for giving a really frank answer about that. Okay. So question, sorry, can you just let me know if my mic cuts out when I move over here to read?
Yes, I will.
Thanks. So Lynn in the chat is asking, as Greens, we tend to see the interconnectedness of many issues. In a world where you will be pushed to establish priorities, what do you see as the most urgent issue facing Canada?
I agree. They're all interconnected because they all relate to each other. So solving one will help you with the others. I think it's inequity. It's inequality, because it's what's keeping us as well from being able to deal with the climate emergency as immediately as it needs to be dealt with. And we've seen it show up with the pandemic. Everyone that I know that is pretty much, their lives are very precarious. Everybody's on the edge. Everybody's working 3 jobs to barely make it. A little bit can completely overturn everyone's lives. And there's not enough of a safety net, not in terms of health, not in terms of housing, not in terms of income for sure, but that's kind of like the surface indicators. So that's, I think, the biggest thing. And when people have such immediate fears of survival in their life, and even for those with a little more capability and privilege, it's still there. We don't have the community necessary to hold people through their retirement and care for them and care for each other. So with that inequality, with that precarity, without working on that, we cannot think of things even a couple weeks down the line.
Yeah, that's a very fair assessment of it. You encounter that a lot when you speak with people who are climate deniers, I guess, on the other hand, and it's like, well, you're telling me I can't drive my truck to work. And it's like, that's why there was the Gilets jaunes.
Yeah, and I think that the side of that that's important is that people don't have the options, and we need to stop villainizing the fact that people live the way they live. I have a truck on Muscatine, to be honest. It's kind of necessary right now. We're going to get some way to replace that, or biofuels, whatever. Yes, please. Yeah. But the way that it's being framed. So we have personal responsibility for the climate crisis, but we do not have the personal ability.
Personal agency.
Personal agency to do anything. And so we don't have the personal support. And then everybody's just stuck in fear. So of course we're not doing anything.
Yeah. That's I think you sold me on that inequality being an issue.
And I think connected to that too, you can, like, with the biodiversity thing, it comes from a place for me that is like, I feel connected to the plants and the animals and other humans and the water and the sky, everything, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
it feels like it's a piece of me. So the changing of it and the death of things is personal. But there
Yeah.
are a lot of people who can rediscover that connection and can
Yes.
find it, and who right now even really greatly care about the world around them, but they don't like being told what to do in a way that they do not have the agency to do anything about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very fair. Okay, so we've got one more question here from Alicia, who's sitting in the other room. Do you see do you see any glaring issues with Canada's Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act?
The way it
Any?
is now, yes. I
Yeah.
had a discussion the other day where I was talking about the current pricing scheme and somebody was talking about the Green Party plan, and we're like, completely realized that we were on the same page, which is yes, it puts currently the responsibility far too much on the individual, and it exempts large polluters and emitters, which is a
Yeah.
huge problem. The individual piece can very easily be solved. And so the explanation for that, I feel, is it's great for it to be in neutral, revenue neutral, so that it comes back to us. But it doesn't work when it comes back once a year or even twice a year. If people are living paycheck to paycheck, it's a noticeable thing. And people in places with higher emissions often have a harder time with that. So making sure that it comes back to us quickly is one part of the picture. And, you know, actually streamlining that to make it happen. It's not too difficult. And then on the other side, making sure that the people who are actually, or the corporations that are actually causing the problems, are having some responsibility in this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so like getting checks out more often than once a year, you'd say like probably like once a month kind of thing would be better. Yeah, yeah. Or once a paycheck even, if you're paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna jump to some of the other questions that we came up with as an EDA here. There's 16 of them. I kind of doubt we're gonna get through all of them. So I'll just go from the ones at the top here. If a by-election were to be called in a riding in Canada away from your home riding, in which the Green Party of Canada has a chance of winning, would you be willing to move there and run in that riding?
Yes.
Okay, that's
I
pretty.
will actually, I'm going to give a little more of an answer than that. Yes, I am perfectly willing to run in any by-election. I also very much treasure the Green Party's commitment to representative democracy and local representation. So if there is a well-known local candidate that has a chance of winning, I think they should probably be given the option to do
Yeah,
so
yeah,
before me. I would
yeah.
help them campaign, but I'd also be willing to do it if that's what the community wants.
Cool. Very cool. I think we kind of already. This is a little bit different. So, what do you see as the most important foreign policy issues facing Canada today, and what are your positions on these issues?
That's a huge question.
Yeah, the world's a big place. A lot of countries.
It's like one thing to ask, what's your approach to foreign policy? Well, what are the biggest problems? So like that's an hour-long conversation or more. So
You only got 3 words to do it in.
human rights abuses.
Oh, wow. I did not expect an answer to that.
No, I really think that that's what it comes down to. So the way that we support selling arms to Saudi Arabia, for instance, just being willing to prop up human rights abusing regimes for a number of different places, interfering in that kind of way, allowing our industry and Canadian companies to continue abusing human rights and, you know, colonizing and destroying ecosystems elsewhere. And, you know, because of economic interests, also not standing up to other problems relating to human rights, but also relating to sovereignty.
Okay. You managed to sum an hour up in under a minute. That was very good. I'm impressed. Cool. So we have actually have a very specific one that I've been asked to ask here about lowering the voting age. So the GPC has a policy to reduce the voting age to 16. Some people are worried that teenagers are too irresponsible and unrealistic to have that responsibility. So what do you think about that?
I very much support lowering the voting age to 16. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is that the evidence shows that the earlier you get people involved in politics or civics in general, civics is such a weird word, that they stay involved their whole life, and we want people to be involved, but it's also the perfect time at school, have learning about what's going on, learning what the political process is actually like, perhaps some nonpartisan, hopefully nonpartisan conversations from teachers about the whole thing and the responsibility, and also the ability for us to have control and of our government and the possibility that we have if we actually participate. So that's one thing. And then the other is that if we're thinking about where the voting age is right now, if you're 18, and you just turned 18 the day after the election, you get to vote what if elections are as normally scheduled when you're 22?
Yeah.
And you've been in the workforce how long? And you're stuck with whatever the administration's before. I mean, we're also, I think, reinforcing the inability of people to feel like they can have any agency, because they begin their adulthood with no ability to control it or to say anything. So that's one thing. And then whenever we talk about trying to decide whether somebody can make a decision or not, we go down a very dangerous road, because you can always say something in that effect towards a whole bunch of different people if you wish to discriminate in that manner. And 16 is a good age because it's one that I think a lot of people agree on, because we can talk about it going lower, but I tend to not try to judge people on age, because you don't know what people are like, what their experiences have gotten, and all of that. And 16 is not that young. My communications and outreach team leads are both teenagers. And my outreach coordinator is 14. And she's incredible. I would trust her with my life. So I'm not worried about her voting in 2 years.
Yeah, I'd imagine not. Yeah, it's interesting that that a lot of people just assume that, because there's definitely teenagers that are a little bit more irresponsible than other ones, for sure, and we're all testing our limits at that age. But a lot of people have been through a lot of stuff at the age of 16.
And there's some adults that are testing their limits at 40. So
yes, exactly, right. It's kind of hard to draw a line with that. I particularly like the idea that of reinforcing the idea of actually getting it started as a habit, because you learn about voting, and then it's like, so in a couple years, don't forget to vote. And it's like, so much stuff is going to be happening between then and now. The only reason I started voting is because my dad drove me to the poll booths and said, you're voting for this party. And I didn't know what that meant, so I just did it.
Yeah. That might be a bit of an issue, but that shows up in everyone that says, oh, my family's always voted this way. Doesn't matter what age, if that's kind of always the argument.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't making against
no,
that.
I know. Yeah.
But I think that not being able to have the agency to be like, even like have voting in school, and like if I was sitting there learning about it and learning about all the different parties' platforms and what that meant for me, and then say, okay, so now you can go make your decision on that right now. Your parents aren't there.
And in general, I think we just need the chance for everybody to learn a lot more about government, governance, policy, political engagement, and the opportunities therein, because there's a lot of people who are disengaged because there seems like you can't do anything with it. And people don't get involved in politics because they don't have a good understanding of government. And I don't fault anybody for that. It's not something that we maintain. It's not something that we're provided well for, and we need to be far more welcoming.
Yeah, very much so. So we got a question here from Sharon in the chat. What skills and strategies will you bring to the role of federal leader? Oh, sorry. I think this might be a compound question here. So I'll ask the second part of it after you answer that. So what skills and strategies will you bring to the role of federal leader? I'll just ask the whole thing, and maybe this will give you.
Okay.
Maybe this will give you some more meat. Beyond winning more seats, what is the most effective way for the GPC to affect the national conversation on critical issues facing compound? Oh no, those are two separate questions, I've been informed.
Okay. Strategies in general. I love to strategize. The scientific mind and the curiosity and the maximizing and minimizing everything all the time. Usually end up saying I care about balance. So a couple different things. I guess it's hard to answer the skills one. I have training in scientific communication and being able to actually communicate ideas to everybody, which I think is really important. Also, empathy and compassion. I want to connect with individuals and really give everybody the opportunity to help design their future, and bring the concept of our Green Party vision to them, but welcome them into it. And that's a process that is done through communication style and also heart. And then there's the lived experience of everything that I have been through, and also, I suppose, work on policy that informs the way that I do approach communicating about different topics, and also kind of what I prioritize. I've also actually have a number of years of organizational experience of running kind of groups, but also facilitating discussions and mediating and bringing people to the same conclusion that started in very disparate places, diplomacy, etc. But in terms of strategy, I think I bring an overall concept of not weighing too heavily on any one thing in terms of how we strategize, especially in terms of growing seats and growing the party. We need to really focus on grassroots, on community development, on being the people in every community that walk the walk and talk the talk and show what the future can hold, so we can then have community leaders elected everywhere and be the representatives that they can be and that are trusted by their communities. And that overall that's one thing that can help change the conversation for sure. But it's also a way to grow long term. So it's not immediate seats, but it's getting somewhere. And then on the other side, knowing that things change, and one mathematical equation is never going to tell you everything you need, especially if you don't allow it to be fluid. So having a strategy that also kind of changes and says, okay, should we bump this person up a bit? Can they make it over the top? And saying, it isn't just about the seats that can be won right now, it's the seats that can be won in the election that follows and all the work that comes in between. Mm-hmm. And then I would say I also bring strategy for making our party more diverse. I don't really like saying it that way, but dealing with issues of inclusivity, safety, and belonging, and internal conflict resolution, and how we build bridges.
Cool. Yeah, I like your answer about helping to get community leaders in place there, and just moving the needle a little bit every time. It's not just about seats. I'm pretty sure, I don't want to speak for Len and Paul Manley, but that's kind of the reason that we had such a strong showing for Paul Manley here in this riding, is the 2015 campaign. They worked hard, did very well, built a lot of ground there. Okay, so we got another question here. I'm not, no name attached to this one. It might still be Sharon. I don't think this is a lot of text. I don't think this is all Sharon. Healthcare is under provincial jurisdiction in Canada, but the federal government can have an impact on improving access to mental health services in this country. What steps can the federal government take to improve access to mental health services in Canada?
I love questions of provincial jurisdiction and federal relationships, actually, because I think it's always the opportunity to talk about what responsibility is where and why that's important, and what level of government is useful for what. And I think that at the highest level, government, should not be about control, but should be about facilitation and making sure that everybody has their needs met and their basic rights protected. And especially when it comes to healthcare, there are a lot of things that need to be streamlined at that level. And one is health data, for instance, going between provinces, but also, interoperability of healthcare programs, so it works for everybody, and providing a basic level of care. And so for mental health, we have really far to go, which is further than a lot of the other components of our health system. So I think there's actually more that can be done, both in terms of kind of mandating basic access, but also opening the conversation of the fact that I can really speak for BC, not too much experience elsewhere, but it's not good that we basically only have access to psychiatry, and even without a pharmacare plan. So, if you're on basics, and then there's just not easy access to counseling. It's hard to find counselors. It's hard to find any other concept of mental health support in general, because there are so many. And that's the kind of thing that having a national mental health strategy will help with. So you can say, let's look at what exists in the different provinces and let's give some support for what needs to be developed, and kind of make sure that that conversation is shaped in a way that is less stigmatizing than it has been, and is also kind of connected to other pieces, which it can not be when you don't have a larger picture.
Right. Cool. Okay. Okay. We're 3 minutes to the end here. We'll see how many more we get through here. I realize that I'm actually sort of being fed questions from another place here, so these aren't attached to anybody. But so how important is it for the federal Green Party to cooperate with provincial Green parties? What will be your approach as leader to that cooperation going forward?
Oh, it's a super excellent opportunity, I think.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that the parties are separate because I don't know, I believe in small government and, or, you know, small systems of government that don't get too heavy or have to control each other. Because we've seen, especially with the NDP and the BC NDP, issues around, you know, well, especially around LNG. There's some arguments there and control that I think was not healthy. So the separation is good, but it's such a wonderful opportunity to collaborate and work on the same things. And so I just want to open up dialogue and learn from each other, and, you know, not be saying we're better in any way. I think we actually have a lot to learn from a lot of the provincial parties, and even civic parties, and that we can really, I think, reinforce each other's work if we do better at that communication.
Yeah, I agree. Staying on the same page. Okay, so I've been told this is the last question here. So
Okay.
what are your thoughts? Very important one. What are your thoughts on, be ready,
Okay.
on vote whipping and caucus solidarity?
I do not like authoritarian structures of governance, so I am not a fan of vote whipping. And I think that the aspect that we get to have of representative democracy, of participatory democracy, of always being there for our constituents as MPs before party line is really important. But that being said, we do agree on things, and we need a very clear view of what our values are and what it is that we represent. And surely MPs should never be voting because they personally believe something, but because their constituents would like something, and it's their responsibility to know what that is.
Yes.
Because that comes up, and you know, we need to be careful of what people are going to suddenly say after they become candidates, and we should know what people think, and we should have conversations if something comes up that is weird, because, you know, a personal conviction is not always the same thing. But if you have a personal conviction so strong that a lot of other people disagree with, how are you going to work with consensus with them? And we should be having the discussions that question assumptions, basically, going into things, and how we get to agreement on evidence and also, you know, representation. The question does come up, though, when we are looking at having a much larger caucus. And if we're in a position of holding balance of power, how do you arrange such things? And I'm very interested in models of distributed governance, where everybody is empowered to decide for themselves, but there are also agreements for who has responsibility on certain things, depending on expertise, but also timing. You want to be able to react quickly to stuff that comes up. Yeah. And, you know, there should be an agreement that if there's something going on that could have a government fall, that you get together quickly with everybody and be like, nope, not going to risk this type of thing. But that's not the same thing to me as vote whipping, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we're just at the end here. Do you have anything that you would like to add? Any final statements you want to make to the voters of the Nanaimo Ladysmith riding?
Yes. As with any, and I also have to just say hi. I came and door knocked a bit on Paul Manley's campaign, not for as much as I wanted to. Yes, I remember. But so just general hi to neighbors and maybe people that I know that might be watching. But in general, right now, as a party, we have an amazing opportunity to grow. And I think to replicate what we've seen in the successful ridings across the whole country. And we have an important place in Canadian politics in general, in terms of the fact that I think we actually offer something completely unique, and we need to make that obvious. But politics is often hard, and there's a lot of people that are kept out of it. And what I am so amazingly happy about is that beyond my wildest dreams, my campaign team has turned into a wonderful community and a place that I am overjoyed to feel at home in. And I would like to have that be what the party becomes and what we provide to the country as well, of where we can go with the political space. So an open invitation to anybody to join us if you'd like. You can check out my website at amitakattner.ca or email me at info@amitakattner.ca to connect if you want to talk more or join our team. And I also want to add that for all of us that are Greens, it's a moment that we need to get everybody else on board. We have till the end of this month to get new members, and it's not going to be that many people who decide this. And this is the way we influence the national conversation. So this is a huge opportunity. Please take the responsibility, get your friends in, and, you know, get them to join on your favorite candidate's website, so the candidate gets a little bit of support from membership fees.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Every single person helping, making phone calls, no matter the candidate you're helped and volunteer with, is going to make the Green Party a bigger deal. Everyone can get to vote on this. Well, thanks so much for joining us this evening, Amita. It was nice to re-meet you digitally, and I look forward to seeing how things progress on your campaign trail. And thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to be sharing a link of this. So we recorded this we're doing this live on YouTube. We're going to have a recording of this. We're going to send it out in an email. So we'll be sending that link to Amita's campaign, so you can pass that around to any followers you might have. And we're going to send it out to our email lists and make it available for everyone to watch. So tell your friends if they couldn't make it to watch this. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Awesome. Have a good night, everybody.